Hello everyone, in this video we will read the chapter A Tiger in the House by Ruskin Bond, chapter 9 of class 7 supplementary book An Alien Hand. So without delay, let's read the chapter. In this part we will read that grandfather finds a tiny tiger cub in the forest and brings him home. Grandmother calls him Timothy and brings him up like a human child. Timothy is playful and naughty. His companions are Toto, the monkey, a puppy, and other members of the house. So the narrator, Ruskin Bond's grandfather, once found a tiny tiger cub in a forest and brings it home. Narrator's grandmother gives him the name Timothy and brings him up like any other human child. And like any other child, Timothy is playful and naughty, and he has two partners, two friends, Toto the monkey and a puppy, and also other members of the house. Timothy the tiger cub was discovered by grandfather in the Tarai jungle near Dehra. One day when grandfather was strolling means walking leisurely in an easy way, down the forest path at some distance from rest of the party, he discovered a little tiger about 18 inches long hiding among the intricate means complicated, roots of a banyan tree. Grandfather picked him up and brought him home. He had the distinction means a difference, of being the only member of the party to have bagged any game, dead or alive. So the author Ruskin Bond belongs to Mussoorie. That is why his stories are based mainly around Mussoorie or Dehradun area. And you can also see that the story belongs to the time when hunting was allowed. So the author says that one day his grandfather was walking down the forest of Tarai forest near Dehradun when he discovered a tiger cub. He was at some distance from rest of the party, that means rest of the members of the hunting party, when he discovered a little tiger cub which was around 18 inches long, which was hiding among the complicated roots of a banyan tree. Grandfather picked that tiger cub and brought him home. His grandfather has the difference of being the only member of his hunting party who could bag any game. That means who could bring any animal home, dead or alive. At first, the tiger cub, who was named Timothy by grandmother, was brought up entirely on milk given to him in a feeding bottle by our cook Mahmood. But the milk proved too rich for him and he was put on a diet of raw mutton and cod liver oil, to be followed later by a more tempting diet of pigeons and rabbits. So the tiger cub was given the name Timothy by the author's grandmother. At first Timothy was given milk, but it proved to be very rich for him. Probably the tiger cub was not able to digest it. So he was put on the diet of raw mutton and cod liver oil, and later he was given more tempting, more delicious diet of pigeons and rabbits. As you know, tigers are non-vegetarian. Timothy was provided with two companions, Toto the monkey, who was bold enough to pull the young tiger by the tail and then climb up the curtains if Timothy lost his temper, and a small mongrel. Mongrel means a dog of no definable breed. Mongrel puppy found on the road by grandfather. So Timothy has two friends, Toto the monkey, who would just climb on his tail, climb on the curtain if Timothy got angry. And he had another companion, a mongrel puppy, which was found on the road by the grandfather. At first, Timothy appeared to be quite afraid of the puppy and darted back. Darted means moved or rushed suddenly, with a spring if it came too near. He would make absurd dashes. Absurd dashes means absurd movement, strange movement, at it with his large forepaws and then retreat. Retreat means go back to a ridiculously safe distance. Finally, he allowed the puppy to crawl on his back and rest there. So first, Timothy was afraid of the puppy and he would move back with suddenly if the puppy came too near. He would make strange movement with his large front paws, and then he would just go back to a ridiculously safe distance. So initially, Timothy was scared of the puppy, but gradually and finally he allowed the puppy to crawl on his back and rest there. One of Timothy's favorite amusement was to stalk. Stalk means move quietly towards anyone who would play with him. And so when I came to live with grandfather, I became one of Tiger's favorite with a crafty means cunning, look in his glittering eyes and his body crouching. He would creep closer to me, suddenly making a dash for my feet, rolling over on his back and kicking with delight and pretending to bite my ankles. So the author says that one of Timothy's most interesting game was to follow anyone quietly who would play with him. And so when the author came to live with his grandfather, he became the tiger's favorite, and the tiger would quietly follow him, come too closer to him, and suddenly make a dash. That means make a moment, make a jump on his feet, rolling over his back and kicking his feet with happiness, pretending to bite the author's ankles. He was by this time the size of a full-grown retriever. Retriever is a breed of dog which is trained to retrieve. That means bring back things in a hunting game. And when I took him out for walks, people on the road would give a wide berth. Give a wide berth means would keep a safe distance from them. When he pulled hard on his chain, I had difficulty in keeping up with him. His favorite place in the house was the drawing room, and he would make himself comfortable on the long sofa, reclining there with great dignity. Reclining means lying in a comfortable position, and snarling at anybody who tried to get him off. Snarling means making an aggressive sound while showing its teeth. So now Timothy was growing, and he had grown to the size of a fully grown retriever dog. And when the author took him for walks, people would keep a safe distance from them. Obviously, tiger is a dangerous animal, so people would stay away from them. And Timothy would pull his chain hard, and the narrator would find it difficult to keep up with him. That means to match his speed. One of Timothy's favorite place in the house was drawing room, where he would make himself comfortable on the long sofa, lying comfortably on the sofa and snarling. That means roaring on anybody who would try to get him off the sofa. Timothy had clean habits and would scrub his face with his paws exactly like a cat. He slept at night in the cook's quarter and was always delighted at being let out by him in the morning. So Timothy had a clean habit. He would generally scrub, that means clean his face with his paws exactly like a cat does, and he was allowed to sleep in the cook Mahmud's house, and Timothy used to be very happy when he was let out in the morning. Now in second part we will read that as Timothy grows up, he becomes less friendly and rather dangerous. Grandfather decides to transfer him to the zoo. 6 months later, grandfather pays Timothy a visit. Timothy is happy to see grandfather, or is he? So Timothy was growing up, and as he was growing up, he was becoming less friendly and more dangerous. So grandfather decided to transfer him to the zoo, and 6 months later, grandfather visits Timothy in the zoo. But was it Timothy or some other tiger? Let's read. One of these days, declared grandmother in her prophetic manner, we are going to find Timothy sitting on Mahmud's bed, and no sign of the cook except his clothes and shoes. So mother would often declare in a prophetic manner, that means declaring future, that one day we will find Timothy sitting on Mahmud's bed with no sign of the cook except his shoes and clothes. So that means grandmother is indirectly indicating that one day Timothy will eat up the cook. Of course, it never came to that, but when Timothy was about 6 months old, a change came over him. He grew steadily less friendly. When out for a walk with me, he would try to steal away to stalk a cat or someone's pet. Sometimes at night we would hear frenzied. Frenzied means loud and frantic cackling. Cackling means noise made by the hens from the poultry house, and in the morning there would be feathers lying all over the veranda. Timothy had to be chained up more often, and finally when he began to stalk Mahmud about the house with what looked like villainous intent. Villainous intent means wicked or dangerous plan or idea. Grandfather decided it was time to transfer him to a zoo. Now Timothy was growing up and he was becoming less friendly and more dangerous. And whenever the author took him for a walk, Timothy would try to steal away. Timothy would try to stalk a cat or someone's pet dog. And sometimes at night they would hear a frantic sound made by the hen in the poultry house, and in the morning they would see all the feathers lying all over the veranda. That means Timothy had eaten one or two chickens, one or two hens at night. Timothy was mostly chained up because of that. And finally, when Timothy started stalking Mahmoud the cook with wicked or dangerous plans, it looked like a wicked plan of Timothy, grandfather decided to send him to transfer him to a zoo. Reserving a first-class compartment for himself and Timothy, no one would share a compartment with him. Grandfather took him to Lucknow, where the zoo authorities were only too glad to receive a gift, a well-fed and fairly civilized tiger. So, considering that Timothy was becoming dangerous to be kept at home, grandfather decided to transfer him to zoo, and he reserved a first-class compartment for himself and Timothy because nobody would share the compartment with the tiger. Grandfather took him to a zoo in Lucknow, and the zoo authorities were very glad to get a tiger who was completely civilized. That means well-mannered. After 6 months later, when my grandparents were visiting relatives in Lucknow, grandfather took the opportunity of calling at the zoo to see how Timothy was getting on. I was not there to accompany him, but I heard all about it when I returned to Dehradun. So after 6 months of sending Timothy to zoo in Lucknow, when the author's grandparents were visiting a relative in the Lucknow, grandfather took this opportunity of visiting Timothy, looking at Timothy at the zoo. The author was not there to accompany his grandfather, but he heard all about it when he returned to Dehradun to his grandparents. Arriving at the zoo, grandfather made straight for the particular cage in which Timothy had been interned. Interned means kept. The tiger was there, crouched in a corner, full grown and with a magnificent striped coat. "Hello, Timothy," said grandfather and put his arm around the bars of the cage. So when the grandfather reached the zoo, he went straight to the cage where Timothy was kept, and the tiger was there. He was fully grown. He was crouched, that means sitting at a corner. He had magnificent stripe of coat, magnificent mane. And grandfather went straight to him and said, "Hello, Timothy," and put his arm around his neck through the bars of the cage. The tiger approached the bar and allowed grandfather to put both his hands around his head. Grandfather stroked the tiger's forehead and tickled his ears, and whenever he growled, smacked him. Smacked means hit lightly him across the mouth, which was his old way of keeping him quiet. So when the grandfather called him, "Hello, Timothy," the tiger came near the grandfather, and grandfather put his hand around his head and stroked him. That means slightly hit on his forehead, tickling his ear, and whenever he was growling in anger or he was making a sound, grandfather was hitting him lightly as he used to do before. He licked grandfather's hands and only sprang away when a leopard in the next cage snarled at him. Grandfather shooed the leopard away and the tiger returned to lick his hand. But every now and then the leopard would rush at the bar and he would slink back. Slink back means go back, move noiselessly back to the corner. A number of people had gathered to watch the reunion when a keeper pushed his way through the crowd and asked grandfather what he was doing. So Timothy, the tiger, started licking grandfather's hands, and he would only go away when a leopard who was in the next cage snarled, that means growled at him with anger. Grandfather shooed the leopard away, and when he did that, the tiger would return back to lick the grandfather's hand. But every now and then the leopard would rushing to the bar, and the tiger was going back noiselessly whenever the leopard would come. And this was a strange sight for people around, and they gathered there to see the reunion between a man and the tiger. And a zookeeper, he came there, pushed his way through the crowd. He came there and asked grandfather what he was doing. "I am talking to Timothy," said grandfather. "Weren't you here when I gave him to the zoo 6 months ago?" "I haven't been here very long, but the surprise keeper. Please continue your conversation. But I have never been able to touch him myself. He is always very bad-tempered." "Why don't you put him somewhere else?" suggested grandfather. "This leopard keeps frightening him. I'll go and see the superintendent about it." So when the zookeeper asked the grandfather what he was doing, grandfather said that, "I am talking to Timothy. Were you not there when I gave this tiger to the zoo 6 months ago?" The keeper said that he has not been here very long, and he said, "Please continue your conversation." At the same time, he also said that, "I have never been able to touch this tiger because he is always very bad temper." And then grandfather said, "Why don't you put him somewhere else? Because this leopard is always frightening him, is always scaring him." And then he said that, "I will go and talk to the superintendent about it." Grandfather went in search of superintendent of the zoo, but found that he had gone home early, and so after wandering about the zoo for a little while, he returned to Timothy's cage to say goodbye. It was beginning to get dark. He had been stroking and slapping Timothy for about 5 minutes when he found another keeper observing him with some alarm. Grandfather recognized him as the keeper who had been there when Timothy had first came to the zoo. So grandfather went to see superintendent, but found that superintendent has gone home early. So grandfather returned back to Timothy's cage to bid him goodbye, and it was also beginning to get dark. When grandfather was stroking Timothy, another keeper was observing him from a distance, and grandfather recognized that keeper, that he was the same keeper who was there when Timothy was brought to the zoo 6 months back. "You remember me?" said grandfather. "Now why don't you transfer Timothy to another cage away from this stupid leopard?" "But sir," stammered the keeper, "it's not your tiger." I know, said grandfather. "I realize he is no longer mine, but you might at least take a suggestion or two from me." "I remember your tiger very well," said the keeper. "He died 2 months ago." "Died?" exclaimed grandfather. So grandfather asked that another keeper who was observing them, that, "You remember me, and why don't you transfer Timothy to another cage, because this leopard is troubling him?" On that, with some hesitation, the keeper said that, "Sir, this is not your tiger." And grandfather said, "Of course, because I have given to the zoo authorities. Now it belongs to the authority." Then the keeper said that, "Sir, I remember your tiger very well, and your tiger died 2 months ago." And grandfather was now surprised. He exclaimed, "Died?" "Yes, sir, of pneumonia. This tiger was trapped in the hills only last month, and he is very dangerous." The keeper said that, "Yes, your tiger has died of pneumonia, and this tiger which you are stroking was trapped only last month, and he is very dangerous." Grandfather could think of nothing to say. The tiger was still licking his arm with increasing relish. Grandfather took what seemed to him an age to withdraw his hand from the cage. With his face near the tiger, he mumbled, "Good night, Timothy," and giving the keeper a scornful means hateful, look, walked briskly means in a quick and active manner, out of the zoo. So when the grandfather came to know that his tiger has died of pneumonia, he could think of nothing to say. The tiger which he was stroking was still licking his hand with increasing relish. Relish means thinking it's tasty. Grandfather took a lot of time to withdraw his hand, to pull his hand out of the cage, and then with his face near the tiger, he said in a low voice, "Good night, Timothy," and then he gave the keeper a hateful look and quickly went out of the zoo. So now you came to know that the tiger that grandfather was stroking was was loving in the zoo was not actually his tiger. His tiger had died 2 months ago of pneumonia, and this tiger was actually a tiger which was trapped last month, and it was very dangerous. So the story is slightly abridged, that means slightly shortened. Now you can go through the question answer, children. I have done it for you. You can pause the video on each page and check your answers, or you can just note it down. So this was about the story, students, A Tiger in the House, and I hope you have found it interesting, especially the turn of events at the end. Do let me know about your opinion about the story, and also if you want me to teach any other topic related to the story. Thank you for listening to the story, students. Bye bye for now. Take care.